Good morning. This is Ron. Welcome to Story Time. And good morning. This is Ron, and it is Saturday, and I am coming to you on location near the Gold Line Station in Pasadena, California. And today, from the 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene, we're going to be reading Law 22. Use the surrender tactic. Transform weakness into power. When you are weaker, never fight for honor's sake. Choose surrender instead. Surrender gives you time to recover, time to torment and irritate your conqueror, time to wait for his power to wane. Do not give him the satisfaction of fighting and defeating you. Surrender first. By turning the other cheek, you infuriate and unsettle him. Make surrender a tool of power. What gets us into trouble in the realm of power is often our own overreaction to the moves of our enemies and rivals. That overreaction creates problems we would have avoided had we been more reasonable. It also has an endless rebound effect, for the enemy then overreacts as well, much as the Athenians did to the Melians. It is always our first instinct to react, to meet aggression with some other kind of aggression, but the next time someone pushes you and you find yourself starting to react, try this. Do not resist or fight back, but yield. Turn the other cheek. Bend. You will find this often neutralizes their behavior. They expected, even wanted you to react with force, and so they are caught off guard and confounded by your lack of resistance. By yielding, you in fact control the situation because your surrender is part of a larger plan to lull them into believing they have defeated you. This is the essence of the surrender tactic. Inwardly, you stay firm, but outwardly, you bend. Deprived of a reason to get angry, your opponents will often be bewildered instead, and they are unlikely to react with more violence, which would demand a reaction from you. Instead, you're allowed the time and space to plot the countermoves that will bring them down. In the battle of the intelligent against the brutal and the aggressive, the surrender tactic is the supreme weapon. It does require self-control. Those who genuinely surrender give up their freedom and may be crushed by the humiliation of their defeat. You have to remember that you only appear to surrender, like the animal that plays dead to save its hide. We have seen that it can be better to surrender than fight faced with a more powerful opponent and a sure defeat. It is often also better to surrender than to run away. Running away may save you time for the time being, but the aggressor will eventually catch up with you. If you surrender instead, you have an opportunity to coil around your enemy and strike with your fangs from close up. In 473 BC in ancient China, the king suffered a horrible defeat from the ruler of Wu in the Battle of Fuzhou. The king wanted to flee, but he had an advisor who told him to surrender and to place himself in the service of the ruler of Wu, from which position he could study the man and plot his revenge. Deciding to follow this advice, the king gave the ruler all of his riches and went back to work in his conqueror's stables as the lowest servant. For 3 years he humbled himself before the ruler, who then, finally, satisfied of his loyalty, allowed him to return home. Inwardly, however, the king had spent those 3 years gathering information and plotting revenge. When a terrible drought struck, Wu and the kingdom was weakened by inner turmoil. He raised an army, invaded, and won with ease. That is the power behind surrender. It gives you the time and the flexibility to plot a devastating counterblow. Had Gaojin run away, or the king had run away, he would have lost this chance. When foreign trade began to threaten Japanese independence in the mid-19th century, the Japanese debated how to defeat the foreigners. One minister wrote a memorandum in 1857 that influenced Japanese policy for years to come. I am therefore convinced that our policy should be to conclude friendly alliances, to send ships to foreign countries everywhere, and conduct trade, to copy the foreigners where they are at their best, and so repair our own shortcomings, to foster our national strength and complete our armaments, and so gradually subject the foreigners to our influence until in the end all the countries of the world know the blessings of perfect tranquility and our hegemony is acknowledged throughout the globe. This is a brilliant application of the law. Use surrender to gain access to your enemy, learn his ways, insinuate yourself with him slowly, outwardly conform to his customs, but inwardly maintain your own culture. Eventually, you will emerge victorious, for while he considers you weak and inferior and takes no precaution against you, you are using the time to catch up and surpass him. This soft, permeable form of invasion is often the best, for the enemy has nothing to react against, prepare for, or resist. And had Japan resisted Western influence by force, it might well have suffered a devastating invasion that would have permanently altered its culture. Surrender can also offer a way of mocking your enemies, of turning their power against them, as it did for Brecht. Milan Kundera's novel, The Joke, based on the author's experience in a penal camp in Czechoslovakia, tells the story of how the prison guards organized a relay race. Guards against prisoners. For the guards, this was a chance to show off their physical superiority. The prisoners knew they were expected to lose, so they went out of their way to oblige, miming exaggerated exertion while barely moving, running a few yards and collapsing, limping, jogging ever so slowly while the guards raced ahead at full speed. Both by joining the race and by losing it, they had obliged the guards obediently, but their over-obedience had mocked the event to the point of ruining it. Over-obedience, surrender, was here a way to demonstrate superiority in a reverse manner. Resistance would have engaged the prisoners in the cycle of violence, lowering them to the guards' level. Over-obeying the guards, however, made them ridiculous, yet they could not rightly punish the prisoners who had only done what they asked. Power is always in flux. Since the game is by nature fluid and an arena of constant struggle, those with power almost always find themselves eventually on the downward swing. If you find yourself temporarily weakened, the surrender tactic is perfect for raising yourself up again. It disguises your ambition. It teaches you patience and self-control, key skills in the game, and it puts you in the best possible position for taking advantage of your oppressor's sudden slide. If you run away or fight back, in the long run, you cannot win. If you surrender, you will almost always emerge victorious. Reversal. The point of surrendering is to save your hide for a later date when you can reassert yourself. It is precisely to avoid martyrdom that one surrenders, but there are times when the enemy will not relent, and martyrdom seems the only way out. Furthermore, if you're willing to die, others may gain power and inspiration from your example. Yet martyrdom, surrender's reversal, is a messy, inexact tactic, and is as violent as the aggression it combats. For every famous martyr, there are thousands more who have inspired neither religion nor rebellion, so that if martyrdom does sometimes grant a certain power, it does so unpredictably. More important, you will not be around to enjoy that power, such as it is. And there is finally something selfish and arrogant about martyrs, as if they felt their followers were less important than their own glory. When power deserts you, it's best to ignore this law's reversal. Leave martyrdom alone. The pendulum will swing back your way eventually, and you should stay alive to see it. And that's the end of chapter 22. Use the surrender tactic, transform weakness into power. And I did want to comment on, let's see, the the idea of yielding, the keys to power, where it says, by yielding, you in fact control the situation because your surrender is part of a larger plan to lull them into believing they have defeated you. And they're talking about when somebody pushes you and you find yourself starting to react. The problem with this tactic is that it's kind of risky in that if, especially I remember when being on the playground in grade school and dealing with schoolyard bullies who wanted to push you around for your lunch money or for whatever else. And if you gave in to them, then they would simply come back to you again and again and again. At some particular point, you had to resist. You could either resist yourself and in some way, directly or indirectly, or you could go ahead and resist them with the use or the aid of another, maybe a bigger kid, or going to one of the teachers or the principal or something like that, or perhaps even going to your parents to try and get somebody to intercede on your behalf. So again, I think that this whole idea of surrender is it's not as cut and dry as the chapter makes it out to be. That all you have to do is surrender. People will accept your surrender, and then you just bide your time until you're strong again and kick some butt. Not necessarily. Again, you might just end up getting used and abused. For instance, the king that they were talking about in China that ended up being being a stable boy, and after a certain period of time, the new ruler went ahead and allowed him to return home. But it might just as well have been that he gets tired of him and executes him, or continues to have him act as a stable boy for the rest of his life. There's no connection between the new ruler giving the old rulers a chance, by sending him home, and the act of surrender. There's no connection necessarily between the two. So when you're surrendering, you're putting yourself on the depending on the tender mercies of someone else. Let's put it that way. In any case, next chapter is going to be tomorrow on Sunday, and it will be Law 23. Concentrate your forces. Conserve your forces and energies by keeping them concentrated at their strongest point. You gain more by finding a rich mine and mining it deeper than by flitting from one shallow mine to another. Intensity defeats extensity every time. When looking for sources of power to elevate you, find the one key patron, the fat cow who will give you milk for a long time to come. And that will be Law 23. And we'll be reading that tomorrow. And thank you for joining me. And until tomorrow, have a great weekend.